Hello and welcome to MindShifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour, and today is Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet, and is a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years now to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again, absolutely free. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one, where people have been stepped through that worksheet process. And if you choose to listen to them even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also go to your App Store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you choose to do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. And if you have any of those to share with us, we would appreciate you doing so by giving us a call at 563-999. Yep, that's an autopilot. By sending me an email, you can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org, or you can email Jeanie at jeanie@whyagain.org. And if we get a comment or question from you, we will address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archive for your feedback or input. And we greatly appreciate whenever anybody chooses to do that. Share your input with us, because it makes it far easier for us to live into our intention with this work. Our intention with this work is to be of service. And that's just a whole heck of a lot easier to do. You know, they say you can't hit something you don't aim at. And if you don't have a target in mind, if we don't know exactly what's working for you, what's resonating well with you, how these things are landing for you, it's very difficult for us to step into the role we hope to have, which is to be of service. And so lots of time for comments or questions today. It's a Tuesday, so that means there will be a support group tonight. All the information you would need to be able to join us for that support group is available on the MindShiftersAcademy.org website. Please remember there's a separate information login page for Tuesday and a separate one for Thursday. And we'd be happy to have you join us. It's always the more the merrier, even though there are times when there are a few people there. We're grateful to everyone who joins us, and we're grateful to those people that say, hey, the schedule's not right for me, or this topic's not right for me, but I'll pass this information along to somebody else who might benefit from being able to join absolutely free a support group to help them learn about and actually apply some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools this psychologist has ever encountered. Please let us know if you or someone you know wants to join us tonight. It's from 6:30 to 9 p.m. Central Time. And we're best to be of service even in that mode. So yesterday we began reading from the book of Course in Miracles, subtitled When Love Becomes a Way of Life, in chapter 21. And we were reading about how you need to free your mind, because once you free your mind, it doesn't matter if somebody imprisons your body. You're not a prisoner. And we had some discussion with Susan Bingham about the way it's talked about. It talks about the mind and the body as though they're two separate things. And our experience is that they're not separate, they're not separable. We can create an illusion of separation, just like the dream of separation from our Creator. And it's probably just about as unproductive to imagine that you're separate from that which created you, or that you're separate from nature, as it is to think that you're separate from your body, or you're separate from your mind, or the two are separate. So he told the story of a man he met when he was working in prisons, who had flown into a rage in his college years and beaten his girlfriend, and she tragically died. And yet he had gone into prison and become a model citizen, and studying spiritual work and doing his own inner work. And he was getting on with his life and finding it rewarding in a lot of ways. And yet the parents of the young woman that tragically died at his hands, even though they were out in the world and had plenty of money, they weren't free because they were just constantly focused on keeping him in prison and starting a letter writing campaign every time he came up for parole, just to make sure that no matter what happened, all their energy was going into keeping him in prison. And Alan writes, as Ray told me that story, I realized that his body was restricted, but his soul was thriving. And the girlfriend's parents had all the money and the physical amenities of royalty, yet their lives were consumed with anger and revenge. And Alan asks, so who was really in prison and who was free? Then he writes, people with physical challenges often find freedom in their mind. The beloved spiritual guide Ram Dass experienced a stroke, and he was largely confined to a wheelchair for the last years of his life. When I presented a program with Ram Dass, I played the devil's advocate and asked him, what would you say to someone who asks you, quote, how can I be happy when there's so much evil and suffering in the world? Close quotes. Ram Dass thought for a long moment, grew a quiet smile, and replied, quote, change your mind, close quotes. Ellen writes, Ram Dass's behavior was an even more compelling teacher than his words. In spite of his physical difficulties, he consistently maintained a light, joyful, loving attitude. He was amazingly happy, considering that his body was restricted. He demonstrated on a daily basis that the deepest freedom is the freedom of the spirit. Meanwhile, many people dwell in perfectly healthy bodies, and yet they're miserable. They create misery. They focus on misery. They focus on the negatives. They compare their lives to what they want that they don't have. More of their energy focused on things they don't have any control over, and they create misery. Teacher of God. Challenge implies doubt, and the trust on which God's teachers rest secure makes doubt impossible. Therefore, they can only succeed. Close quotes. There is no challenge to a teacher of God, because challenge implies doubt, and the trust on which the teachers of God's work rest, secure and solid, that trust makes doubt impossible. Therefore, the true teachers of God can only succeed. That's from the manual, chapter 4, the second part, 2.5-7. Ellen writes, Spirit cannot be challenged because there is nothing outside of wholeness and no power greater than it. A teacher of God is not daunted. A teacher of God soars above the appearance of challenge by observing all situations from a higher perspective. When the disciple Peter expressed doubt to Jesus, the Master replied, quote, You are thinking as a man thinks, Peter. You must think as God thinks. Close quotes. That's from Matthew 16:23. In Richard Bach's classic parable, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the mentor, Chang, tells Jonathan to fly as fast as thought to anywhere that it is. You must begin by knowing that you have already arrived. To fly as fast as thought to anywhere that is, you must begin by knowing that you have already arrived. Close quotes. Real travel is not of the body, it is of the mind. People or limiting circumstances may appear to control where your body goes, and yet no one can control where your mind goes. Dr. Stephen Hawking served as a striking teacher of the unbridled power of the mind. While his body was severely constricted, he was recognized as one of the most brilliant physicists of our age. His body could not stop his mind from probing the mysteries of the universe and shedding light on them. Many people feel trapped because they do not have enough money. If I had more money, I would be free, they think. Not really. If they just had more thoughts of freedom, they would be free. The Course affirms that we are abundant beings living in a universe that supplies us with all we need. If we feel poor, we've made up a story of lack and chosen to dwell in it. God has given us the power to create with our minds. We cannot create reality, which has already been created in utter opulence, and yet we can create our experience. The spiritual guide Bashar teaches, quote, You are always abundant in something. If you constantly think thoughts of lack, you are abundant in lack. You can just as easily become abundant in supply by focusing on your thoughts of supply. Now, I get it. This is a tricky thing for a lot of us people. the law of attraction, Abraham, the channelings about the law of resonance in the universe. There has been much that's been made over the years, and people take these kinds of concepts and turn them into basically a scam or a Ponzi scheme, and they get people to give them money, like televangelists that are always asking people to send them money. Meanwhile, they're preaching a gospel that says, or a lesson that says, you don't need money, you just need to think positively and it will all manifest. So when I read things like this, I just like to refocus on this one point that was already made. I don't get to create the outside reality. And yet, in each new present moment, I have the choice of the focus of my conscious awareness. And it's the focus of my conscious awareness in that moment that creates my experience of life. In any moment, if I choose to focus on the things that are going well, as long as I'm still in a body, if I've got the breath of life in me, if I have the capacity to walk, to see, to talk, whatever, maybe I've only got one of those. Maybe I can only see and I can't walk or talk. Right? Maybe I can see and walk, but I can't talk. But if I focus on what I have and I choose gratitude for what I have, I change my experience of life. On the other hand, and I have a friend that I knew in graduate school, and when I met up with her 10 or 15 years after that, I was shocked to hear that she and her husband, also a therapist, psychologist, had gotten a divorce. And I said, I'm kind of shocked to hear that. And she said, well, what I tell people about this is that my husband and I have had knocked down, drag out fights in some of the most beautiful locations on this planet. So they could be on the French Riviera, on a balcony in a 5-star hotel having a room service, and he can have a meltdown over there's pulp in his orange juice. Now that's an extreme situation, and on the extreme on the other end is here's Roger McGowan on death row in Texas for 26 years, and he's choosing for love. He's choosing to be a spiritual teacher. He's choosing to be grateful for his life. So I want to make sure that we're focusing on the experience we can create moment to moment, rather than starting to talk so much about the physical things we might manifest. So, he writes, many people feel trapped because they do not have enough money. If I had more money, I'd be free. The Course affirms that we are abundant beings living in a universe that supplies us with all we need. If we feel poor, it's because we made up a story of lack. Now notice, he says, if we feel poor, it's because we made up a story of lack and we've chosen to dwell in it. God has given us the power to create with our minds. We cannot create this external reality, what Michael Ryce would call the actuality, and yet we can and do create our own experience. So, Alan writes, other people feel trapped by their relationship. If only I were single, I'd have more freedom to do the things I want to do. Such a train of thought is a sure indication of specialness. You have given your partner undue power over your happiness. And then here comes A Course in Miracles to the rescue with one of its most penetrating insights. Quote, this is from the textbook 17. Quote, only what you have not given can be lacking in any situation. So if you feel like you're not getting enough love from your partner, it can only be because you're not giving enough love in that moment. If you're giving love, if you're in this rooted awareness that your true nature is love, and you're extending your true nature in that moment, you're going to be feeling that energy of love. You're going to have the experience of love. So then Alan writes, identify whatever it is that you've been withholding and give it, and healing is sure to follow. We cannot blame our partner for taking away our freedom. The thoughts we are choosing, not our partner, is what forms the source of our experience of either freedom or bondage. And I've had, various different levels of success with this over the years, trying to get people to understand the dynamic here. But this is one of those deeper meanings for the lesson from the Way of Mastery, where it says, you need do nothing. Now, this doesn't mean the Way of Mastery as a teaching wants you to just lay like a bump on a log and, eat garbage food and stare at a TV screen or sleep away the day all day. What it means is you are choosing everything you're doing. And if you are in the process of choosing what you're doing, but thinking that you're being forced to do it, or thinking that you're trapped in the relationship, or thinking that you have no choice but to go to work, then you create an experience that's riddled with tension and upset and resentment and bitterness. Michael Singer gave this as an example in one of the last couple of podcasts of his that we watched in the MindShifters support group. He said, I know a lot of people who, when they're out driving to a destination, especially through a city, if they hit a number of different intersections where the light is red, or just turning red right before they get there, they start getting agitated and irritated and swearing at the lights. And he said, it's a choice of what you want to choose to interpret and place on that situation. He says, it's just life unfolding. So when you get there and the light is red again, you can sit there and generate all these thoughts. Oh, the world is against me. Oh, these engineers are idiots. They're not timing this right. Or, oh my gosh, the world's going to end because I'm not at this meeting on time, or whatever it is that you generate as a negative thought. You can pour your mind energy into it, or you could sit there and say, you know what? Take a nice deep breath and say, I'm so grateful for these traffic lights, because without them, people would be running into each other all over the place. So just take a breath into this and soften and try and get yourself to understand that in every moment of every situation, where you pour your mind energy in that moment creates your experience of life in that moment. And if you, regardless of what the situation is, if you choose a thought like this is all bad, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening, and you pour your mind energy into that, you generate a very different experience than if you simply take a breath and say, oh, this is happening. How can I respond in a way that benefits myself and everyone else? Then you get a very different experience of your life. And to my way of thinking, that's why the Way of Mastery calls us in the third lesson to dismantle every judgment and every perception. Because the judgments we create tension within us. They restrict our actual physical energy systems from functioning properly. And they create the upset, the bitterness, the resentment that we generate and feel. So he writes, many people on the personal growth path cultivate the freedom to, quote, just to be myself, close quotes. Alan writes, that's a most excellent pursuit. Yet we must decide which self we are free to be. If we seek freedom to be a body, an ego, or a personality, we will still not feel free, for we are bequeathing our identity to a finite, limited, death-prone self. If we seek freedom to be our divine self, which is infinite, all-powerful, and eternal, now we're on to real freedom. Then he quotes Course in Miracles workbook where it says, quote, "Let me not forget myself is nothing. Myself with a lowercase s is nothing, but my capital S self is all." Let me not forget that my thoughts of, I'll paraphrase it, I'll rework it a little bit. Let me not forget that my sense of my identity, my thoughts about myself, my past actions are nothing, and yet my true nature, my essence, my connection to my source is all. Ellen goes on and writes, "We must allow others the freedom that we wish for ourselves. To see another person as a body or a personality only keeps that person in our mental prison. To see them as an unfettered spirit, this liberates them. In order to heal, we must release our friends from our belief that they are limited. When we recognize their perfect safety, their immortal nature, we draw forth their authentic, healed, capital S self, and our own authentic, healed, capital S self." He goes on, "Many countries celebrate some form of Independence Day. Yet if we depend on liquor or drugs to make us happy, or on our religion to be the only right one, or on our partner to prove we are lovable, then we're not truly independent at all. We're dependent on validation from the outer world, and this sets us up for even more emptiness and pain. Real independence is independence, relying fully on the natural capital S self within each of us." He writes, "The God that created us loves us and walks with us always." Then he quotes a textbook 18 saying, "If you knew who walks beside you on the path that you have chosen, fear would be impossible." Close quotes. And thus we arrive at the most important freedom of all, freedom from fear and smallness. Guy Finley has written award-winning books on fearless and free, and how to be fearless, how to live a fearless life, etc., because this is such a critical, the dichotomy from A Course in Miracles and the Way of Mastery is there's either fear or there's love. And love is the only thing that's real. Fear is what we made up. It's an illusion. So Alan writes, "Thus we arrive at the most important freedom of all, freedom from fear and smallness. The only real liberation is soul liberation. When we peel away the illusions that breed unworthiness, victimization, and guilt, all that remains is love. Then we're free to be who God created us to be, the only freedom we ever sought, and the only one that truly matters." He writes, "Jesus spent a great deal of his ministry striving to liberate the Jewish people from guilt, burdensome rituals, and hypocrisy. Yet those same failings have worked their way into the religion that has grown up in Jesus' name. If you want to be a true Christian, walk in the same freedom from fear that Jesus demonstrated." I hasten to add here, that doesn't mean you have to go out and arrange for somebody to crucify you. It just means that you choose for love over fear, that you withdraw your attachment to the identifications you've created with your negative self-talk and your negative thoughts of self-loathing, etc. So that last line again is, Alan writes, "If you want to be a true Christian, then walk in the same freedom from fear that Jesus demonstrated. Then you will fulfill his teaching to remember that, quote, I am the light of the world. That is my only function. That is why I am here, close quotes. That's from the workbook 61. Ellen writes, Jesus said that of himself, he said this thing of himself, that I am the light of the world. That is my only function. That is why I am here. And yet, he also says it of us. If you're wondering why you came to this world, and where night seems to be far longer than the day, now you have your answer. Dr. Martin Luther King's gravestone is inscribed with one of his famous quotes, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Close quotes. Alan writes, we don't have to die to get free. We just have to elevate our vision so that we recognize our brother's wholeness and our own. Only then can we say we are free. And A Course in Miracles has succeeded in creating the crucial shift in perception that it came to deliver. When we are free, A Course in Miracles has succeeded. His miraculous insights at the end of this chapter ask the question, do you feel free? And then, if not, where do you think greater freedom lies for you? And then, what freedom of the body do you seek? And then, what freedom of the mind do you seek? And then he writes, who do you know that has physical freedom yet is imprisoned mentally or emotionally? And why do you think they're trapped? And then he asks, who do you know that may have physical limitations and yet is thriving spiritually? Why do you think they're thriving? And his last question is, what does it mean to be, quote, free at last, close quotes? Then he offers these affirmations. I affirm that I am free because I choose thoughts of freedom. I affirm that no physical situation can trap me. I affirm that I learn freedom from people who are truly free. And then I teach freedom of the spirit by my example. So here we are living in this physical realm, using words that are trying to point at or talk about things that go beyond the words that we're using and go beyond our experience in the physical realm each new heartbeat. So there's a lot of room for misinterpretation and misunderstanding and misattribution of meaning. And that's why we have plenty of time for discussion. Is this making sense? Are you one of those people who's very unhappy with your life right now? Are you somebody who's struggling immensely with either the physical or the mental or the emotional or the spiritual situation that you seem to be in? Give us a call. Type a comment in. Let us know how is this landing for you to yet again be talking about how you have the capacity to create your experience of life. You may not have the capacity to create an entirely different life for yourself, and yet you do have the capacity to create an entirely different life experience for yourself. And if you're listening on live.needle.com/mindshifterradio, thank you for being here. And yet, if you're listening on the web, you can't type a comment or ask a question. So you'll need to download the Needle app, Nedl, AI Tuner for Live Radio. And once you download that app, open it, answer some questions. It'll give you the option to type a comment in or tap the phone icon and actually speak to us voice to voice. And as I say in the intro, we'll greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, because for two reasons. One is because it makes it so much easier for us to live into our intention to be of service. And the other one is because it dramatically increases the quality of the show, as far as I'm concerned. It at least dramatically increases the probability that the show will be of a higher quality, because the vast majority of our highlight shows are the result of people calling, people just like you calling and asking questions. So I will take a breath. I will ask for comments or questions. I will check the app to make sure that no one is sitting there with a comment or a caller hand raised that I'm not noticing. And since no one else is calling, I will just mention that the difficulty we have so often in communicating accurately about these things is that we assume that we know what someone means when they use a word. And we assume that everything's on the same scale. Guy Finley likes to talk about everything is in scale. And at one level of scale, it may be very accurate to say you're living in an abundant universe. At another level of scale, it may be very accurate to say you're about to get your car repossessed or evicted from your apartment because you don't have money. And especially in this day and age, in our country, we have people that work 2 and 3 and sometimes 4 jobs, and they still can't make enough money to avoid debt and or to keep the house and the food there for their children. So on that level of scale, yes, there is an ability for there to be lack. At the same moment, as I talked about earlier, if I'm focusing on what I don't have, I create one level of experience. And if I focus on what I do have, I can create a different experience, a brighter, more grateful, more positive-based experience. And that particular advice, that particular choice to shift the focus of my conscious awareness over to what is going well and what I have going for me in the moment has absolutely transformed my life experience for the better. And I've been practicing it and getting better and better and building that. You could call it the mental muscle, building the habit of choosing a positive outlook, of asking, how can I be a blessing to myself and others in this next moment? And I strongly recommend it to people simply because it's been so practically effective in my life. I remember a time when I was just back from my second job out of college. I was out in Northern California for almost Oregon for over 4 years. And while I was out there, I was reading Wayne Dyer's early works. He had a book called Your Erroneous Zones. It was a play on words because there was a popular a popular book at the time about your erogenous zones. And so he had to play on words to or your erroneous zones, and he meant if your thoughts are off the mark, then you create upset in your life. And I'd been living as a single person and working and able to go backpack in the mountains and ride my motorcycle and, you know, keep a fairly healthy lifestyle for a young person. And, I was in good shape physically and I loved hiking in the mountains and fishing and all that good stuff. And then I came back here to the Midwest to go to grad school because I realized I needed more training to be able to help the people with the serious issues that I was encountering as a counselor in a juvenile hall. And so I came back here to go to school, but before that I needed to do some work to save some money. And I was working construction, which I'd done to get through college. And my next door neighbor owned a construction company, and he sent me out to Colorado with his pickup truck and a fifth wheel rig, and said, pick up a couple trailers that I bought through a telephone auction here. And I took a friend with me, which is a darn good thing. So, these two 20-somethings are out there driving through the mountains in a truck that's having a hard time just getting there empty. And then we're supposed to pick up these two big trailers and drive them back. He said, but don't worry, because when you get to this place, there's going to be a crane that can lift up one of these trailers and place it on the back of the other. And then you just, strap that down, chain it down, and then just back your truck up, fifth wheel it to the trailer on the bottom, and bring them both home. Okay, no problem. Everything's going to be fine. We drive all the way out there, Aurora, Colorado, and we get there, and it's painfully obvious that the guy that sent us had no idea what he was talking about, because they had sold the crane that was supposed to lift up the one trailer and put it on the other. And this friend of mine, who had not been reading Wayne Dyer's materials, was not focused on positive thinking and shifting your focus to what you have to be grateful for. He was having a meltdown. And because of my let's just do the best we can and it'll all work out even though I have no idea how, because of that attitude that I'd been practicing for several years by reading Wayne Dyer's books and listening to his audio tapes, little cassette tapes, I just kept deflecting all of his negativity and joking about it, and we got the thing done in a thing that, and I knew that gentleman until last year when he died, and any time that came up, he would marvel at how I was able to keep my attitude so positive or get things done when they seemed impossible. And there's no magic in it, but there is the focus and the awareness that if I pour my mind energy into the, oh boy, woe is me, it's all lost, that's going to be my experience. And if I pour my mind energy into, okay, this is happening, it's way too important to panic about, how can I be a blessing to myself and others, I get an entirely different experience in my life. And, this isn't to say I get everything I dream of and nothing goes awry. It just means that when things go differently than I had planned or wanted to, I have been able to train myself to catch the early warning signs that I'm going down that negative thought rabbit hole and shift the focus of my energy to something more grateful, more relaxed, more questioning, rather than knowing, oh, this is bad and this is wrong and this shouldn't be happening. So we've got about 10 or almost 15 minutes left for comments, questions, answers, testimonials. Please feel free to type a comment or press the phone icon on your app to give us a call. I wish, in a lot of ways, I wish that we had a standard teaching protocol in our culture, in our schools, that would teach this, if nothing else, to people, the value. So Susan Bingham says, "How did you get the vehicles back?" Um, what happened was, against all odds, with patience and leverage, we took the sides off of one of the trailers, which would become the bottom trailer. And with leverage and my considerable strength as a young man and patience, we loaded those sides of the one trailer into the other trailer. And then they had a berm of sand and dirt built up with some railroad ties to keep it from falling, just disintegrating. And so they had a hill basically with a sharp drop on it that was about, 2 feet taller than the bed of the trailer. So we took the trailer without the sides and backed it up and lined it up and then unhooked it. And then we got in the truck and hooked it up to the one with the sides in it and blindly backed it up off that ledge, little cliff, onto the other trailer, and then strapped it down and then drove the truck around and hooked it up to the other one and got out of there just in time to avoid being locked in to that compound. And then we went to a little local diner, and my friend, who had some experience with trucking and shipping, bought a drink for a couple truckers and asked them, "Hey, how do we drive this rig, which is probably barely legal, on the back roads so we don't get stopped by the state troopers and ticketed, and so we can make it over the mountains?" Because this truck was barely making it empty, and we limped our way home. So, and most of the way home, we laughed and joked and told stories. We drove through the night taking turns, and we made a lifetime of memories. Not a lifetime of memories. We made a life memory of that several-day adventure. Just we didn't give in to the negativity. We didn't say there's no way to do this. We just said, "Oh, I wonder how we might." And as we kept looking at options and trying them, eventually we got something to work. And we delivered the trailers and was there for another year and a half before going to grad school. So that's how we got the vehicles back. And as we were driving back and having a great difficulty getting that truck to go very fast at all, we stopped for gas once and decided to check the air filter and found out it was black as coal. So we bought a new air filter and put it on, and all of a sudden the truck had a lot more power to get those two trailers back. So, but that was back in the day, probably back in 1980. So 81 maybe. So things are different. Life goes on, and yet the lessons I learned from people like Wayne Dyer back then, the positive psychology stuff that he eventually shifted over into his spiritual teachings, always seemed to work well for me, and so I kept using them. And I was blessed, as I've mentioned a number of times before, to basically hit the lottery in terms of parents. So I had parents who routinely demonstrated for me the adage that when something really intense goes on, the best attitude to take is, this is way too important to panic about. And with that as my foundation, and then finding teachings that I resonated with, like And Wayne Dyer wasn't the only one, but people like Wayne Dyer who were doing that kind of cutting edge, moving from pop psychology into solid spirituality back along the day, then it has served me quite well over the years. So we have time. We don't have to use all that time. I think I'm going to just mention the title of the next chapter from Alan's book, Of Course in Miracles, When Love Becomes a Way of Life. The next title of the chapter is Beyond the Hero's Journey. And this is where he mentions one of my other favorite teachers, who was Joseph Campbell. Joseph was a brilliant mythologist, anthropologist. He was an academic, and he studied many of the world's religions, cultures, and fables, and found that they all have told one story in common. And Joseph Campbell named it The Hero's Journey. And since nobody has a hand up, I think I'll tell one of my favorite Joseph Campbell stories, which is about just be yourself. I think it was Dr. Seuss that said, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Don't try to mimic or copy anybody else. Just be yourself. And there's an ancient story about the god Indra, the king of the gods, Indra. And he was sitting up in his throne looking down at the earth, and everything's going fine until one day a monster, Vitra, starts rampaging down on earth, setting fires and just creating all kinds of chaos. And Indra was up there, the king of the gods, and looked down on this and said, wow, this is weird. I've never seen anything like this before. And what should I be doing here? And finally he looked down at the side of his chair and he saw a bucket of lightning bolts. So Indra picks up a lightning bolt and flings it down and vanquishes the monster, Vitra, and the waters flow again and the earth is restored. And then Indra says to himself, wow, what a fine boy am I. And he goes off to decide that he's going to have to be more honored and more magnificent than anybody. Oh, I know what'll do it. I need a bigger palace. So Indra goes to the god of the architects and says, I need a bigger palace. And that god, the architect, says, no problem, that's what I'm here for, and he starts working on it. Well, after a while, Indra comes and looks at it and says, yeah, but it needs to be bigger. And after 14 or 15 of these repetitions where Indra keeps coming and saying it needs to be bigger and grander, finally, the architect of the gods, the god architect, goes to Brahman, the head of everything, and says, look, you got to help me here. I'm eternal. This guy's eternal. He's never satisfied. If we don't stop this, I'm never going to get to work on any of these other projects that need my attention. Brahman says, don't worry about it. Go back home. I'll take care of it. Within the next day or two, Indra is sitting in his castle on his throne, and up to the castle grounds walks this little blue-black boy, just beyond beautiful, radiating, beautiful aroma and charisma, and the children are all dancing around him as he's walking, and he walks into the castle, and Indra says, oh, so what brings you here? And the little boy says with a voice rolling like thunder, I've heard that you believe you are an Indra like no other Indra, and that you decided to have a palace that was bigger than any palace before you. And he says, and you've done a fabulous job. This is really amazing. It looks amazing. And Indra said, Indra's before me. What do you mean? And the little blue-black boy says, oh yes, Indra's before you. They've come and gone, come and gone. Indra says, how could that be? And the little boy says, well, Vishnu sleeps in the cosmic ocean, and a lotus flower springs from its navel. When the lotus flower blooms, sitting on it is a Brahmin. Every time the Brahmin opens its eyes, a world like yours comes into existence. Every time he closes its eyes, the world goes away. He opens his eyes, another world like yours comes into existence, ruled by an Indra. You know, the same kind of thing. There's another monster there to be vanquished. There's another architect, etc. And then the Brahmin closes its eyes and that world goes out of existence. He opens his eyes, another world comes into existence. Another Vitra, another Indra, another architect. And he says, and a Brahmin's life is 10,000 years. And at the end of his life, he dies. The lotus flower retracts into Vishnu's navel. Another lotus flower rises, holding a Brahmin, and every time that Brahmin opens its eyes, another world comes into existence with another Indra and another Vitra, etc. And the little boy says, while you may have gods and wise men in your kingdom who are up to the task of counting all the stars in the sky or all the grains of sand in all the seas, none of them would dare count the number of Brahmins, let alone the number of Indras. And then the little boy noticed a parade of ants walking down. There's a line of ants just parading around him and going off into the palace, and he chuckled. And Indra, indignant and angry, says, what are you laughing at? And the little boy says, don't ask unless you want to be hurt. And there was just something about his tone and certainty that set Indra back, and he quieted himself and said, I ask, teach me. And the little boy said, you see these ants? Former Indras all. Each one of these ants began at the lowest form of life, worked their way up to an ant, worked their way up to a human being, worked their way up to a god, worked their way up to the king of gods through the repetition of lifetimes, and then they became an Indra, and they threw their lightning bolt and vanquished Vitra, and they thought, oh, what a fine boy am I, and then they came crashing back down to start all over because they'd lost their focus. Well, this traumatized Indra, and he decided, that's it, I'm not going back to being an ant. So he decided to go off and live in the woods and meditate and pray for the rest of his life. Now, as a king of the gods, he had a queen of the gods, and she was a beautiful, powerful, intelligent person, and she had a job to do. And she was not about to go off and live in a hut in the woods. So she goes to Brahman and she says, hey, Brahman, you got to help me. Indra wants to go off, abandon all of his duties in the kingdom, in the palace, and go live in the woods. Brahman says, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. A day or two later, traveling wise man comes through the woods, runs into Indra, says, hey, Indra, I haven't seen you since you arrived here in this kingdom. Indra is a little bit slow to recognize him, but he finally says, okay, well, and he says, hey, do you remember that book I gave you when you got here? It kind of introduced you to the kingdom and give you it's like an employee handbook, right, for the king of the gods. And it talked about your role in the kingdom and how if any monsters come up, you have to vanquish them, etc. Well, you've got a role to play here. You're not supposed to be in a hut in the woods meditating and praying. There are other people who can do that. And your wife, as the queen of the gods, has roles to play and has duties to keep this whole thing moving. Now, you're not the greatest God that's ever been, and you're not all that is, and there are other more powerful things in you and other less powerful things, but you fit into this process. So go back to your palace and live your life as it was intended. Don't get too big for your britches. Don't play too small. Just be you, as Dr. Seuss said. Everybody else is taken. And Indra went back to the palace, and his wife was happy, and the kingdom was happy, and the next time a monster came, he knew to the use of the lightning bolts, etc., etc., etc. So that's one of my favorite stories about Indra from Joseph Campbell, or at least as close as I can recall of the way he would tell that story. I thank you all for listening. We've reached the end of our hour. I will remind us all that we have a support group tonight from 6:30 to 9 p.m. Central, and all the information you would need to join us absolutely free is available on the MindShiftersAcademy.org website. I will remind us all that Michael and Jeanie are busy this week. Michael's doing quantum still point, whatever he's doing, and so beginning right about now, there's going to be a Podbean episode that you can listen to of one of those, the audio files of something that you would normally have to purchase from their DVD catalog. And I will remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Blessings.